What up, everyone? I'm Shark. Today's video is in honor of the 2.0 launch of Company of Heroes 3 and, of course, the Fire and Steel battle groups. I know many of us in the community are hoping that all of this new content will bring new players to the game. Company of Heroes 3 is an RTS unlike any other, and if you've been on the fence, I hope this release will help encourage you to join the community, especially the multiplayer community. In the spirit of welcoming new and returning players, this video is a quick primer for jumping into multiplayer for the first time, or a refresher for those of you that have been on a break waiting for Fire and Steel to come out. I am going to try to keep this video to a reasonable length. As such, it's not an exhaustive list of tips and tricks. I will have timestamps in the description below if you want to jump forward to specific sections of the video. As always, if you have any other thoughts, suggestions, or comments, please hit me up in the comments section. I will try to respond to everything you guys post. I look forward to seeing what you all would suggest for newer players as they get into multiplayer for the first time. One thing I hear a lot is that the single player is a good primer for multiplayer, and this is true to some extent. Playing the campaign or playing against an AI will help you learn the game mechanics, but it's not a substitute for human opponents. Just because you can beat an expert AI doesn't guarantee that you're going to win your first 10 1v1 multiplayer games. If you do plan on using single player to get ready for multiplayer, I would say wean yourself off of tools that are exclusive to the single player, in particular the tactical pause. It's a crutch that's not available to you, and so don't get in the habit of using it. However, I would try to build muscle memory when it comes to some of the things I'll talk about later, using the Tac Map, using control groups, rotating the camera, etc. Building that muscle memory will go a long way in helping you stay on top of things as you play human opponents for the first time. If you jump straight into multiplayer, I'd say expect to lose the first few games even if you have an RTS background. Matchmaking isn't perfect, human opponents are unpredictable, and they will probably know the meta better than you do just joining the game. Don't get discouraged. If you have a friend who has the game that you can scrimmage with, or someone who knows the game fairly well that can coach you over the shoulder using a streaming platform like Discord, that is super helpful and will significantly shorten your learning curve. And then finally, save your replays of close games, especially your losses. Watch them with your friends, send them into casters to get a kind of review of the mistakes that you made. You will learn a lot more by reviewing your games and especially your losses than you will by continuing to pound your head into the multiplayer queue. Another suggestion I see for newer players is to start with large format team games like 3v3s and 4v4s. And honestly, this is a pretty good idea. In large team games, there's a degree of safety. Flanking is more difficult, your teammates can help protect you, your lane is narrower, your map awareness is easier, and sometimes these games can just be more fun. Large format team games typically devolve into huge battles of heavy armor and artillery, which is really exciting and cinematic, and one of the things that people really love about Company of Heroes. So if your goal is just to get at big explosive battles with your friends, large format team games might be all you need. But if your goal is to be competitive at 1v1s and 2v2s, playing the large format games won't teach you everything you need to know. You'll learn the game mechanics, units, and abilities, and it is much better than playing against the AI, but other things are very different. The build orders are very different and change significantly between 1v1s and 4v4s. In a 1v1, rushing for late game artillery or heavy armor is much less viable and can actually put your whole game at risk. In fact, I'd say 1v1s and 2v2s focus much more on map awareness, situational awareness, and maneuver over the mass firepower and artillery of large format games. In 1s and 2s, engagements tend to involve fewer units and be spread out across the map, and then losing a squad early can throw your entire game. Some of the long retreat paths on certain maps can be extremely punishing. Now, while some of this may sound negative, I know that many people, myself included, really enjoy the intellectual and competitive challenge of 1v1s and 2v2s. The games are never the same, and climbing the elo or rank ladder can feel very rewarding. Okay, and now I want to talk about build orders, right? If you've watched any of my videos, you know that I spend a lot of time in CAS and post-match reviewing the build orders, looking for counters, other options that the players might have used to win the game. I will say, having a basic plan at the start of the match is a requirement for success, but sticking to a script all the way through also doesn't make sense. You need to adapt to what your opponent's doing. The best thing you can do is know roughly how you want to play and what battle groups you think you want to use. That'll make sure that your first choices are efficient in terms of resources and set you up for success later in the game to react to what your opponent's doing. The other thing I'd say is, unlike previous Company of Heroes games, there is value in delaying tech slightly to make sure you have a balanced build order and then focusing on catching up with the tech tree a little bit later. There's no need to rush through as fast as possible. Unit composition and map presence really matter in CoH3. So what I want to do now is go through some example build orders for 1v1s. These are going to be pretty vanilla, right? It's an opener, it's a start, it's battle groups to consider. There are way wider options available, especially if you really lean into the different battle groups. But this is a good starting point, I think, and something that you can adjust over time to fit your playstyle. All right, so when I'm Americans playing against Wehrmacht, I like to go for mobility early and use the advantage that riflemen have over grenadiers in the early game. So I'm going to start with a second scout, build the barracks, and get about 3 riflemen and a mortar out. The order really depends on how quickly you see the MG42 from your opponent, but the scouts and the riflemen allow you to spread the map out. The mortar allows you to deal with an MG42 or 2, and then you make your support center choice: infantry support center, mechanized support center. Against Wehrmacht, motor pool, I think, does a little bit better than weapon support center. If you have a really good early game advantage, you can always push for tier 4 for that tank depot. Some battle groups that I think will work with this: armored. You can play heavy into rifle with armored. You don't need to use the assault engineers, but that's also an option for you. And advanced infantry. If you decide to lean more into the infantry heavy play, you can convert the riflemen to rangers, or you can just make use of some of the other battle group abilities, especially the artillery in the late game. Up against the DAC, you're going to want to take a slightly different approach. Still want 2 scouts. You can go weapon support center here instead. I normally get 2 HMGs and then 1 or 2 bazooka squads based on what the DAC player is doing. DAC actually doesn't have a lot of good early game answers to good machine gun play, so good positioning will help you take good map control. At this point, you make your support center choice, and then you can really lean into the M3 half tracks. The quad 50 is good if they go Bersaglieri. If they go light vehicles, the 75mm gun motor carriage is also super helpful. I like both the airborne and the special operations battle group with this build because you get that late game infantry without needing a barracks or rifleman. So airborne paras and pathfinders, or for the SSF, you obviously get their commandos. All right, next looking at how you'd play Wehrmacht as the Brits. Again, I recommend getting a second sapper, build your section command post, get 3 infantry sections out for map presence, and then a mortar or a Vickers HMG depending on what your opponent is doing. A mortar is really good, obviously, if they have multiple MG42s on the field. A Vickers can be good if you see Grenadier spam right off the bat. Then you want to go into the platoon command post for your Humber, which is great, especially if they lean into Panzer Grenadiers or light vehicles like the 221. The Humber can chase it down and gives you a lot of options, as well as the 6-pounder AT gun is available here. As far as battle group choices, this is a relatively vanilla build. The Gurkha Indian Artillery Battle Group plays really well into this. You can also get access to the heavy mortar if you want it. And then the Armored Battle Group gives you a couple of different branching options. You can lean heavily into sappers or into the Crusader AA tank, or just use its general late game abilities to beat your opponent back. And now looking at how you would play the DAC, this doesn't change a ton for me. You get 2 sappers. You maybe get a Vickers HMG early if you like the MG play and you want to exploit the fact that DAC may have a hard time countering it. Then you get the section command post out, 3 infantry sections again, and then really you want to look at unlocking your grenades. If the DAC play with a lot of light vehicles, those grenades are really available to help save you via snares. At that point, you're really going platoon command post and into the Humber to help deal with some of the light vehicles and give you more map presence. Again, kind of a vanilla build order, but this should at least get you through the first 5 or 6 minutes of the game. For battle group choices, I like Air and Sea here for its general support abilities to the rest of like the vanilla approach. If you want to go Aussies, this changes a little bit because you want to get 3 Aussies out early. So you wait until the section, until all those Aussies are on the field before you build your section command post. Then you go straight into the platoon command post. You get 1 or 2 of the 2-pounders on the field to deal with the light vehicles, and then you go Humber and progress from there. All right, now as Wehrmacht playing up against USF, again, start with 2 pioneers, a lot of utility, a lot of quick map presence, get the infantry company out, and then depending on the build, if you're getting spread out quite a bit, I like at least 1, if not 2 of the MG42s. It's the best machine gun in the game, suppresses very quickly, and can help you with crowd control. I then go 2 Grenadiers. I don't want to overinvest in Grenadiers. Instead, I want to use some of the advanced infantry available from tier 2 or tier 3. This is where I think you have to make a choice based on what your opponent is doing. If they're playing heavily with team weapons or light vehicles, then I like tier 2, the Luftwaffe company for the Jaegers with Shreks, and the 221 potentially into a Wirbelwind and Martyr build. If they're playing very heavy with rifles or they're leaning into Rangers, then I want to go tier 3. Get Panzer Grenadiers out on the field, get a Stummel as early as possible, and pack 40s to deal with some of the late game armor. Battle groups that really work for this, Breakthrough is great, especially if you play heavily into a Luftwaffe company build, because you can lean on Wirbelwinds and Martyrs until you get the Tiger at the end of the game. Mechanized, as always, is fantastic. The Stug D with the Stosstroop and Call-In is great at dealing with USF infantry. Panthers at the end of the game, good at dealing with USF vehicles, and you obviously get access to the Vespa. Playing as a Wehrmacht against the Brits is a little bit different because you're less worried about infantry spam, but you do have to respect some of their light vehicles like the Humber, the Stuart, and then eventually the Crusader. So again, 2 Pioneers, infantry company, get that MG42 out, provide a base of fire. 2 Grenadiers, maybe a mortar. Remember, Brit infantry like to play in cover, so the mortar can be really useful. At this point, I really recommend going the Luftwaffe company. The 221 gives you a lot of mobility and a lot of anti-infantry firepower, and you can upgrade it with the Panzerbuchse to deal with the Humber or any other light vehicles that pop out. Again, you can go Wirbel, you can go Martyr, and then really you want to tech into tier 4 and get some of those late game vehicles out if you're not doing something like stalling for a Tiger. Battle group choices, Mechanized, still a great choice here against the Brits. I also recommend potentially looking at Luftwaffe. You get the manpower hacks, you get access to the Fallschirm Pioneers, which they're a little bit of glass cannon, but they can provide you some early game utility, and then lots of air-based abilities there. Okay, now finally taking a look at some DAC builds against Americans. You really do have to be worried about MG and Zook squad spam. I think that to counter the mobility and the ability of USF to spread you out, you need to lean on some of the mid-game light vehicles. So I recommend 2 Panzer Pioneers, a Panzer Grenadier squad, a 250 half-track into the light support company. Get 2 Assault Grenadiers, 1 as like the half-track call-in, 1 you pair with the existing 250. Use that combat disembark to force engagements to go your way, to deal with machine guns, to deal with bazooka squads. Then you go Mechanized company. From here you can go 8 Rod, Stug D, Martyr as required until you get into tier 4 and the end of the game. Battle group choices, really recommend Armored Support Battle Group for this approach. If you want to use the Bersaglieri, the Italian Combined Arms, it's a very different build. You essentially use your Bersaglieri like you would use USF Riflemen, get 2 or 3 out on the field early, spread out the map, and try to win via map control. For DAC against Brits, I recommend a slightly different approach. I think you can get away with being a little bit more infantry heavy and leaning into your team weapons. So again, 2 Panzer Pioneers at the start, 2 to 3 Panzer Grenadiers, and then light support company into fire support elements. This will unlock the AT guns, the LEIG, and the Flakfrling. I would use your first call-in for Panzerjägers because the Humber is so dangerous, but Panzerjägers and a half-track are a good natural counter. You can chase it around and force it to be inefficient. And then if they're playing very infantry heavy, I'd go with the Flakfrling. If they're not, get an AT gun out and start prepping for the late game with your tier 4. Battle group choices, again, the Armored Support Battle Group, always good for the DAC. It really provides a lot of support to the vanilla DAC build, right? But espionage can also really work for you here with the incendiary munitions and the ambush. So now that we've covered basic build orders, I just want to remind you, build orders are really cool, but execution still very much matters in this game. There are a lot of excellent micro tips and tricks videos out there. I'll talk more about some of the really good content creators towards the end of the video. What I want to do is highlight a few of the things that I've learned and I think are better overarching themes that'll allow you to control your units the way you want to and be effective, even if it's your first multiplayer game. The first thing I want to highlight is the use of grid hotkeys. You see down here, this grid is the grid that's being referred to. The hotkeys right now will follow my keyboard, QWER ASDF ZXCV, in position. So if you see the position of the item, the hotkey for it is always the same and is not related to the name of the item. The grid hotkeys are really important because it allows for consistent positioning and use of different keys, right? So on top of all the movement dynamics and construction, which is always S, your bottom row, your abilities are always the same as well, right? So for most infantry, you'll see a grenade or an anti-infantry action is Z, right? Stick grenade there, frag grenade for the riflemen. For the paras, it's a frag grenade, the bundle grenade for the panzer grenadiers. The Vet 1 ability is always going to be activated by V as well, right? You can see here for the panzer grenadiers, it's V. For the US forces, when they reach Vet 1, there is a choice, but even if you choose the one unlocked by key C, it's going to go back to being V, right? This provides a lot of, it really helps with muscle memory when you know you want to activate the ability, but you don't want to have to reach down here to click. As a general rule, you should want to keep your mouse cursor in the center of the screen. This also applies to vehicles. Again, Veterancy 1 is provided at V. Another base ability is provided at Z. So for the Sherman, it's Smoke. And then for vehicles and other team weapons, Attack Ground is E. And then R goes from retreat to reverse. Now, one thing you do need to keep in mind, if you have a vehicle selected with a unit that can retreat, right, the R is going to default to a reverse move. So you do need to select that unit on its own to be able to give it a retreat command. To adjust your grid keys, you go to your settings, go to Controls, View, and Remap. And if you click on grid keys, it'll allow you to establish the grid here. If you want to change it, you can swap out any of these keys. This matches my keyboard, so I have no desire to swap any of that stuff out. Next, I want to talk a little bit about control groups. So control groups are very powerful and have a lot to do with your ability to control units in the way that you want to. So you can lump everything in together, and when you have stuff in a unit, you can use Tab to select individual squads or entities within that group. But grouping unlike units together in a control group can be dangerous because it basically eliminates your ability to quickly use veterancy or special abilities. And like we talked about with the grid keys, lumping vehicles with infantry units can make it harder to retreat that infantry unit. So what I want to do here is highlight how I use my control groups and some special rules. There are obviously lots of systems out there, but this one has really worked for me. I took this from Ares, who's a very high-level 1v1 player, and it's worked in the long run. So first off, my primary maneuver units are in Group 1. These are, like, think mid-game, like 8-rod style units, and then late game, these are your main battle tanks, your generalist mediums. These are the units that you want to use around, move around for their maneuver value. Notice I'm not using mainline infantry here, and we'll talk about that later. Group 2 are your anti-tank units. Sometimes this starts with anti-tank infantry like the Panzerjägers or the Boys AT rifles, progresses to AT guns, and then late game can also include things like Hellcats or other tank destroyers. Group 3 I use for indirect fire or artillery as early as mortar, or late game something like a walking Stuka or Vespa. Group 4 are my engineers. It's pretty self-explanatory. Group 5 are my scouts, and then occasionally a specialist unit like a Funk Panzerwagen, since the DAC doesn't have a scout unit outside of the Krodschützen. I then use 6 as my alternate anti-tank if I've got lots of different units, 7 as my alternate artillery, 8 for my med units, and then if you have it, 9 for AA. It's all dependent on how well you can use different parts of the keyboard, but you can see you want to keep most of your units in groups 1 through 5. Now, like I said, you don't want to lump a lot of different units together into a group, which is why I have alternate control groups. And lastly, like I mentioned previously, there are no mainline infantry on here. The reason is I don't group my infantry together because I don't want a blob. If you group your infantry, there's a tendency to move them all kind of in the same way, give them all commands at the same time. I find it's easier to use the Tac Map and to maneuver those units specifically by clicking on them and moving them individually. That keeps me from blobbing and keeps my units spread across the map. So what I want to talk about here is the use of the Tac Map. So the way I have thought about this and the way I've kind of been taught to use it is to use the Tac Map anytime that you think you would use the mini map, right? Because the Tac Map provides you a lot more awareness and a lot more capability. Like the mini map, you can click around, but you can't select units, you can't give them orders, you can't tell them to move one place or the other. You can do all of that on the Tac Map to include use of abilities. The other reason that I really like this is I can live in this Tac Map right here and maintain really good awareness of what I can see and what my units are doing and what the enemy's units can see and are doing, right? And so you can rely on audio cues, and the audio in this game I think is better than in previous CoH titles, but staying here allows me to see everything happening at the same time, whereas if I sit here and my scouts are in contact, I'll have no way of knowing. One other extremely useful Tac Map feature is the ability to double click to center your screen on a unit. So by using the Tac Map here, now the scouts are in the center of my screen. I can maneuver them, I come back to the Tac Map, and I can move in for another set of orders. Being able to double click and center on the screen keeps my mouse in the center of the screen, which reduces my reaction time and reduces the chance of misclicks. I can also trigger abilities like retreat from the Tac Map. And again, I just want to highlight with these scouts, I can select their veterancy and I can upgrade them using the hotkeys from the Tac Map without having to look at it. You can see they got the smoke drop and they've got the utility packet. If you are struggling to use the Tac Map, I suggest one of two things. One, if you really need to, take a Post-it and cover up the minimap portion of your screen. That'll force you to use the Tac Map anytime you would think about using the minimap. The second is to play a game and have someone watch over your shoulder and have them berate you every time you use the minimap instead of using the Tac Map. Sometimes having a little bit of coaching or a little bit of encouragement can go a long way in helping you achieve what you're looking to achieve. So now I want to talk a little bit about when to use regular movement versus when to use attack move, which you might not always see if you're watching someone play because you can use the hotkey Q and then left click. And so it might not be apparent, but you can always tell from the behavior of the unit. It's really important because you have to consider the range value of your unit versus the opponent. So in this case, I have grenadiers in green cover and rifles in yellow. Rifles are best at short to mid range and grenadiers are best at long range. And really what I want to do with the rifles is negate this green cover. So if I'm going to attack these grens, and like this isn't a great idea to just attack over open ground, but I'm going to move from yellow cover to yellow cover, and then I'm going to have them advance straight to this green cover. The green cover will help protect the rifles somewhat from other units, but it'll also allow them to get in close for the point blank mechanic against these grenadiers. In this case over here, I've got pathfinders and paratroopers, which are better at long range against panzer grenadiers in green cover, who are better at medium and short range with their automatic weapons. In this case, if I want to attack with these paratroopers, I'd want to attack move rather than deliberately move. And so I'm going to have them move up slowly by using the Q and then clicking. As soon as they get into range of the panzer grenadiers, they will open fire. And then in this case, because there's green cover right here, I'm going to move them into green cover. When you have units that you prefer to use at range, it is usually a better idea to attack move them around the map versus tell them to click. Because they will stop and react to other enemy units. Then you can always come micro them into specific cover as required. It's also a really good idea to attack move team weapons, in particular machine guns, because it will again cause them to react, recenter, and then fire at max range where they're most effective against enemy units. This also works really well for mortars, right? Rather than micro every single barrage, if you tell them to attack move in small increments, they will identify and open targets that you have spotted and begin to shoot on them without any additional micro attacks required. You can always barrage, but attack moving the mortar around the map can be really helpful. Now I want to talk a little bit about anti-tank weapons. It can be really helpful to attack move your anti-tank guns, but they will respond very, very slowly now that they have a longer pack up and setup time. So if you need them to be responsive, the best thing to do is to actually give them a command to face. That means the next time the vehicle arrives, they'll get that first shot off sooner. Really funny because it whiffs these shots, but it did get 2 shots off, which normally would have been enough to kill the Stummel. With bazookas, however, you need to avoid attack moving when possible, because a well-microed unit will begin to kite away. And as you see, the bazookas now will try to chase and won't be able to get a shot off if you try to attack move them. So giving them deliberate attack orders on the target will result in them being more likely to get their hits. All right, a couple other things I'd like to cover when it comes to micro. First off, mines win games. It's been a saying in this community forever, and it's still absolutely true. A well-placed mine can prevent an enemy vehicle or tank from chasing down a retreating squad, can set up a vehicle for an ambush, or it can just generally attrit the enemy and bleed their manpower for the cost of a handful of munitions each time. When in doubt, place mines. Start by placing them on routes where you'd be concerned that an enemy could flank you or dive you. And then when you get used to where you think you should place mines on various maps, start to get aggressive and cheeky with it. The only other rule I'd say when it comes to mines is make sure you place them in a position where you can do something about it, right? So super advanced mine placement may be good for harassment, but if you can't follow up that engine crit by killing that vehicle, it may be wasted munitions. The next piece has to do more about your mentality, when to be patient versus when to dive the enemy. And this is something that's more feel. I'd say as a general rule, you don't want to commit your units piecemeal. You want, if you're forced to retreat parts of your forces, you want to wait until you have everything realigned and healed before you want to try pushing again. But a lot of 1v1 and 2v2 gameplay is about the ebb and flow of that combat, knowing when to be aggressive and knowing when to be patient and hold the ground that you have. Really good players have this crazy feel for it, and sometimes a well-timed base inspection can be the difference between you winning and losing a game. And lastly, remember that this game is won and lost on victory points. Your ability to control the 3 VPs on the map will ultimately determine whether or not you win. It's really easy to get tied up in engagements and trying to win the tactical fight, and then to lose because you weren't paying attention to the ticker. So always remember, 500 VPs, if you force your opponent to surrender early, that's an awesome bonus. And then if you get an annihilation victory, then congrats, because those are super rare and kind of fun when they happen. All right, and before I close out, I wanted to highlight some of the other awesome creators in the community for you to go look at if this has kind of whetted your appetite for CoH3 content. On the Shoutcast side, you have Imperial Dane, the propaganda cast with daily videos, Tightrope, who casts outstanding content, and then Fred, who has a smaller channel but does some really cool stuff with video editing and playback during his casts. If you want to go over game mechanics and learn the game in depth, Tightrope is definitely the gold standard. I also want to highlight Daniel D on Twitch, who posts a lot of good kind of mechanics videos and short tutorials. For in-game strategy and strategy explanations, Stefan JF and Havoc are exceptional. Stefan's on YouTube, Havoc is on YouTube and Twitch. Both these guys talk through their thought process as they're playing, which blows my mind. Really good for seeing how the decisions are made in real time. And then for people that post just larger team gameplay videos where you can kind of learn the mechanics and watch how they manipulate their units throughout the map, I want to highlight Turtle War, Achilles, and Hunter Dak, all 3 great channels, all on YouTube. As far as this channel goes, I obviously do casts and some other strategy or mechanics videos. My casts include detailed post-match commentary and build order analysis. If you want to just watch me play the game for some reason or play with my friends, all of that is streamed on Twitch. The link to my channel is down below. And that's it. Really glad you all are here. I really can't wait to see what the next year of Company of Heroes 3 will bring. That is all we got, and I will see y'all in the next one.